In Exodus, Israel's told you're going to be a kingdom of priests. Priests for who? Right? Priests for the world.
Yeah, it's on behalf of some.
And those priests had their own priests, right? So there were Levites who were the priests for Israel, and then the people of Israel were the priests for the world, right? So there are these two phases. And then St. Peter takes that same language that's translated royal priesthood from the Greek usually, same language, and applies it to the church, almost as if the church were Israel.
How about that?
and says the same thing, which means it's not just that these are these rules, right? And these are these fast rules. Sometimes, even in the Orthodox Church, even with a good Orthodox understanding of salvation, we could fall into this idea that the goal is just about me saving myself.
Yeah, no.
Right? But that the reason we're keeping these disciplines and the reason we're drawing close to God is so that we can serve as priests. We offer the liturgy, we offer the sacrifice of the Eucharist for the life of the world and for its salvation.
Right.
For the whole creation, which includes but is not limited to all the people in it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm reminded of that fame, that there's this quote from Saint Seraphim of Sarov that often gets quoted as a kind of slogan, acquire the Holy Spirit or acquire the Spirit of peace and thousands around you will be saved. And I think sometimes people hear that and they take it as like, oh, well, there's this wonderful secondary effect that other people around me are going to be saved if I just work on my own salvation.
Collateral damage.
Yeah, right. And I mean, and there's a certain truth to that, but often it gets turned into this kind of quietism. Right, that all I have to do, just humble me, a sinner, just a poor sinner, is work on my salvation, and that might have a nice effect on the people around me. But if you look at what Saint Seraphim himself actually did, yes, he did spend those 3 years out there kneeling on a rock out in the wilderness, praying and really praying, but then after that, his life became this open door for the world, right? He became an offering for the world. He became a priest for the world, right? It always goes like that. It's like at the end of the Divine Liturgy, there's the let us go forth in peace. To do what? Right? To go to coffee hour? Or to go to that's not, it's go forth, having received the Holy Spirit. We go forth now as priests of the world to bring the blessing of God into the world, to intercede on behalf of the world, to help cleanse the world. Like, that's what we're being sent forth to do. It's not just, I got to make sure I get my ticket so that I can go to the good place when I die and not the bad one, right?
And one of the big things we lose when our Christianity becomes materialist is we lose the priesthood, and we lose sacrifice, and we lose worship, because those aren't things anymore. Priesthood is maybe something Christ as the great high priest is doing off in heaven, but sacrifice isn't really a thing we're doing. And what happens with materialist Christianity every time is it devolves into politics. If it's conservative materialist Christianity, it devolves into right-wing politics. If it's liberal materialist Christianity, it devolves into liberal politics. But in both cases, you're using fundamentally material means to try to bring about or enforce some idea of justice, or to create some kind of utopia on earth through purely physical means, which means material means force. It means force either in the form of direct force and violence, or social force, the force of public shame and public will and public sentiment. Your enemies become the people who disagree with you. They're the enemy that has to be defeated and destroyed. And we're trying to do all this without God being involved, because we're doing it without priesthood, and we're doing it without worship, and we're doing it without sacrifice. And so the only thing we can possibly create is hell on earth. And so the answer to this is to realize once again who we are. People who are in the church and people who are outside the church, people who love Christ and people who hate Christ, have the same enemy. And it's not Christ. They have the same enemy, and it's the demonic powers who want to enslave and destroy us. And we are here as priests. We are the hope that has been placed in the world for those people outside the church. We are the ones who, as priests, are able to bring Christ to them and bring them to Christ. We're the ones who are called and empowered to reconnect them with God, to bring them into community of which Christ is a member, so that they can come to know us and be in communion with us and be in communion with Christ. That's what can transform the world. That's what can transform people. That's what can help us all defeat our common enemies. But if we give up, if we forsake, if we ignore, if we give up that role that God has given us and called us to, then just like Christ said about the salt and about the lamp that gets put under a bushel, there's no hope for the world. Those people aren't going to find that hope. The world is not going to be changed in any positive way. So the gifts that God has given us of knowledge, of understanding, of our own salvation, he's given to us as a deposit that he expects to bear fruit. He's planted something in us, and he's going to want the harvest from that to be offered to him at some point in the future. And so I think when we come to understand Israel's worship and how it was directed outside of itself, it wasn't solipsistic, it wasn't just contained in Israel and just Israel concerned with their fellow Israelites and we're going to find salvation and to heck with those people outside, they're all evil and rotten sinners. That has to transform the way we view our own lives and our own worship and the purpose of all of this in the first place.